Okay, and welcome to our first discussion about actually how to do the coding in Dreamweaver. And I think it's important that we understand that this is going to be the last major assignment in the course, and it really shouldn't be as difficult as some of the other assignments, only because really you don't have to do all that much that you haven't already done. The trick here is to understand how to manipulate HTML code and where you would do that. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is talk a little bit about Dreamweaver within the context of HTML and why Dreamweaver is actually a good choice for this situation. Now, editing HTML. When you edit HTML, the first thing you got to remember is HTML is just text. Don't let anyone fool you. That's basically really what it is a dirty little secret, because there are incredibly expensive programs for web page design, and really all they're doing is manipulating text of one kind or another, or they're bypassing it. And so you can edit text anywhere. You don't need an expensive program. You can use Notepad. One extreme, which we'll talk about first, is when you have these big programs and these big services that take the code completely out of your hands and do everything based on some sort of a screen editor where you're designing the size of your little windows and stuff like that. And what it's doing is it's generating amazingly complex code that you can't see, and it's eating up a lot of bandwidth. It's also very difficult to edit that later. You have to always go back to that same program. And I'm not going to name names here because I don't claim to know them all, but all of these places where you go on the internet and say, design a website right here, and then you basically put your content into this cookie cutter thing and do that. Now, I'm not saying that there's no place for that, but what I will say is that is not web page design. And so if you're looking for work and you want to include the idea that you're a web page designer, don't do that if all you can do is go to those services, because that isn't really very fair. And also, these websites, they tend to look the same. I mean, you got to admit, most of the sites produced by those particular templates end up looking almost like every other website of its type. Okay, now the other extreme is when you just use something like Notepad, because Notepad just edits text. It gives you absolutely nothing. And so you literally have to start from scratch and type in the code letter by letter. And that can be tedious. You can edit the code using nothing but Notepad, but it is time consuming and it has no shortcuts. It's also very unforgiving. So if you spell something wrong, if you've got a tag that you spelled wrong or use the wrong punctuation somewhere inside, you got the wrong, it's like a quotation mark or a singular quotation mark, it's going to fall apart very quickly. And so you have to know a lot more about the coding to do it from scratch. And so this isn't always the way to go. So then we have something like Dreamweaver. Dreamweaver is designed to help you and support you, but not necessarily take everything out of your hands. The program was originally designed to be the best of both worlds. You can see and understand the code, and you can also get a better and more real-time look at the results. The program also contains coding shortcuts and aids, meaning that your tags, they're in a different color than your text, and so you can tell what's a tag and what isn't a lot easier. And a lot of it just saves a lot of time. Now, here's how we're going to make it work. I'm going to give you some sample code to work with. Now, this is why I don't consider the assignment all that difficult, because if you basically do nothing but modify the sample code I've given you, as long as you do it well, that's really what the assignment's about. Because you are not necessarily going to be in charge of building a website, but you may be in charge of updating one. Also, understand that in some cases, in fact, in most cases in the corporate setting, they hire companies to do this. And so these are server providers, and oftentimes they go a lot deeper than just the basics, or there's a head office somewhere that handles all that. But occasionally, someone needs to make a simple change to something that may be a local part of a bigger website, and that's where you come in. And so we're not talking about building a website from scratch that millions of people are going to be accessing. We're talking about changing the code and hypothetically, maybe building something simple because it used to be a lot easier in that regard. So this is the web site for your sample code. It's www.mucommunication.com/webtemp. And that will give you the appropriate code to work with. And we'll show you what that looks like in a few minutes. And you do not have to use this code. You are free to do it from scratch if you already have this skill. You can do that. Or if you want to use some other element of Dreamweaver to do this, I would encourage that. What you cannot do is go to some Wix thing and bang out a website using their template and then say that you've learned HTML, because the purpose of this code, the purpose of this assignment is to get you to actually look at the code. Okay, all you have to do is modify the text and provide yourself with a color scheme. That's basically it. Okay, so let me explain how this is going to work on the basic level. Now, going back to the client-server relationship, which we talked about last time. Remember, the client is the browser, and the server is wherever the website is, and the stock and trade is the code, meaning that the server has no idea what the information it's carrying is, and the browser doesn't really know either. What the browser is doing is it's asking for various files which are incorporated with HTML, and then when they receive the files, the browser tries to interpret them. And so whoever writes the code actually has to have the ability to see what that looks like. So Dreamweaver can open the code. So you can start with this, you can see what the code is as it starts, and if you don't like it, you can change it. You can also see what the code will look like because you'll open a browser window. Now Dreamweaver comes with a browser window, which may be good enough for this particular assignment, but if you really want to get a good look, you might want to open your browser and go to long forgotten little menu structure, go to File, Open, and open a page using your Google Chrome or whichever you're using. The other way you can do that is go to the File Manager, go to the file you want to open, right-click on it, and go to Open With, and choose a browser and see what it does. Look at the code itself and see how it's interpreted by the browser, and then when the changes are made in the code, the browser will display them. Save the code. So remember, if you're working in Dreamweaver, save all of your code, and basically, that's all for now. We're going to talk about what you do with the code later on, but once you've modified it to your liking, that is where you can stop at this point. And so then at some point, we will decide how we're going to view these. Okay, so this is where the assignment starts. So what you're looking at is an extremely ugly web page. This is called Index of Web Temp. Now, why was it called that? Because if you look at the browser line here, you see www.mucommunication.com/webtemp, and that's where it gives you this. Now, nobody would actually create a website as ugly as this. The reason why it looks like this is because it's missing something critical. It's missing what's called an index page. Every website has one, and that is the first page that the browser will display. So it's going to go to that particular thing. Now, if we're going here, we've gone to the www. We've skipped the first part, which is the http://. And so the browser has looked for Methodist mucommunication.com, which is a domain that I happen to own. And so that's a domain, and basically all that is a name that I pay about $7 a year for. And then from there, when it finds that domain, it looks for an IP address. And the IP address associated with that is a server that I pay about $30 a month to use. And so somewhere in there, there is a folder under that name called WebTemp. And in that folder, the first thing the browser wants to see is the index file. Well, there isn't one. And so because there isn't one, what it does is it say, well, I don't have the index file, but this is what's on the page, or this is what's available. And so in this particular case, that works out quite well. So if we look over here, there is a series of files that you can look at. Now, the first one is called bannertemp.fla. Please ignore that. That has nothing to do with this assignment. Every other one does. So this first one, do.png, is an image. So let's start with that. It's not HTML code, but it is associated with the code, and you'll see where. So if I right-click on this, right-click, you see you get all these options here. I'm going to go to Save Link As. And when I do that, I go here, and I have set aside a folder called WebTemp. And so I find where that folder is. Wherever it is on your computer is wherever it is. And so just find it using your browser over here. And then I'm just going to go ahead and hit save. And that's it. Then I go to the next folder, or the next file. Right-hand click on that one, save. It's going to go to the same place. Now you'll notice you don't see the other file because that's a different type of file. I'm just going to go ahead and hit save. And then this one, save link as. And now you notice this is a similar file. It's an HTML file. And I'm going to hit save there as well. And that one, save link as. There it is. And that one, save link as. And there it is. Now, one thing I have to warn you about here, seriously, is do not change the names of these files. Don't change the names because they're associated with each other. Now, that's not to say that you cannot change what's on the files, but if you want to keep the menu structure as it is, you need to leave those as they are. Okay, now here we are at Dreamweaver. This is what Dreamweaver should look like when you just open it up. You may be able to customize it. It may ask you if you want to do designer or something else. It doesn't really matter which option you choose, but you can basically modify those. So now let's go over here and we're going to open. We're going to open Dreamweaver, and of course you can learn anything you want with all these other things. This will show you recent files. The program comes with some tutorials, but we're just going to open a file for now, and from there I'm going to find myself in WebTemp. And so once I find where those files are, I have to know, that way you save them where you know they are and you find them where you know they are. And that's actually the hardest part of this. So I'm going to open up one of those. Now notice it isn't showing the image file because this is an HTML editor. It only edits HTML. So I'm going to go and open up Menu. Menu is the first page. And actually I'm going to do a little bit of a shortcut here, and I'm going to open up all of them at once. So if I click on the first one, hit the Shift key, and click on the last one, it will open every file. And so then you see up here, you get, right now it's in split view, which we'll talk about in a minute. There's the menu, there's the form, there's page 2, which is exactly like all the other pages, except for that. So I'm going to start with the menu. We'll leave the menu as it is. And so you see here, this is an ugly page. It has no character whatsoever, but it's not supposed to. And down here, this is the code that makes that page do what it does. And so if I scroll up and down there, you can see basically it's just the word text written over and over and over again. And you get some codes here. And really, you don't have to know much about that. We're going to look at these in turn. If I were to go up here to the top, which you can just see, and I go to the live view, you will see what the page would look like if the browser displayed it. I'm going to prove that in a second here. If I go to code view, all I see is the code, all of it. And so we're going to spend some time in code view because I don't want you to be afraid of it. We're going to talk about what the code does shortly. So here's the thing. I want to prove that this works. So I'm going to open up the file manager, and I'm going to look at these files. Now here, this is the file manager, so it doesn't really care what the files are. So I'm going to grab menu. I'm going to basically highlight that. I'm just going to right-hand click on it. I'm going to go to open with. Now here, you've got your choice to open it with Dreamweaver, which it's already open there, so that would be unnecessary. I'm going to go ahead and open it with one of these browsers. So if I hit Firefox, look what Firefox does. Firefox dutifully opens that page. Now notice, if you look at the top here, this is not a website. This says File, and it goes right to wherever the file is in your computer. So it's basically like a really, really fast internet connection because the browser is literally looking at a file that's already there, so it doesn't have to download anything. And so that's what you want to think of this as. So we're going to keep that open, and then I'm going to go back to Dreamweaver, which I can just click down here, and I'm back to Dreamweaver. So that's the code, and that's what it does. So for a while, that's what we're going to be working with. So if I go over here, actually before I do that, if I look way, way, way at the top of the browser, you'll notice this thing that says Untitled Document. That is one of the most horrible things that you can ever see on the internet. That means that somebody didn't even bother to give the document a title. So I'm going to show you a little bit about how you could fix little things like that in virtually seconds. So I'm going to go back to Dreamweaver. And if we look at this, notice the code starts at line 1 and goes way the heck down to wherever. And so we're going to go to this number 1 line, and this basically is, don't even bother thinking about that. That's just a bunch of web page design talk that some committee made up. But this supposedly tells the browser something about the code being used. The first actual tag that shows up is the HTML tag. Now the HTML tag, basically all it says is that HTML starts here. Now, you might wonder, why would you have to do that? Well, because if you go way, 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 way the heck down to the bottom, you will see this other tag that says /HTML. What that means is that, remember when HTML started? Well, here's where it ends. Anytime you have a tag with a / in front of it, that means that the tag is a container. It has a beginning and an end. And everything outside of the tags is not in the tags. And so, everything outside of HTML would have to happen either before or after this pair of tags. And so, if you're designing a web page, you would have to actually type that in. Now, the next code that you see is the next code that you see is this thing called head. And so, head starts at line 3 in this particular case. I notice /head is here, so head starts here and ends here. Now, header, this is anything that is associated with the code that is not seen by the user. And so we don't have to worry about this in this assignment. We're not really doing much here. But within header, you see a tag called title, which opens and closes on the same line. That's the title. That's what shows up in the browser window. I don't like untitled documents, and so I'm going to call this, well, what should we call it? We'll call it Welcome to HTML. So there it is. So now, this is critical. The first thing I must do is I must save this file, because if you look at it here in the little window, you see a little asterisk there. That's saying changes have been made to this file. Now, if I hit File Save, the asterisk isn't there anymore. So that means the file is no longer untitled. So then if I go back to my browser window, I look up here and I still have untitled document. That's because the browser never contacts the server unless it's told to. Now, it's possible you can have a code somewhere in your web page which forces it to go back now and then, but we don't want to think about that right now. The other thing you got is this wonderful refresh button here. And so that will say, browser, go back and refresh it. So if I hit this, bang, welcome to HTML. The browser says, well, that file I was looking at, give me the current version, and it reaches into the little local area, and there it is. And so you got welcome to HTML. So if we go back here, now we're done with header. Now we have body. Body is the everything within the body tag is what the browser displays in the main window. So if we go all the way down to the bottom of the page, you will notice somewhere down there you have /body, which says that this is where the web page ends. Okay, so therefore, fortunately, there's not much you have to know about that. And there's very little that really has to be changed there. Now, we'll talk about style sheets later, but right now we're just doing the basics. Now, if you go to this one, H1, that's within the body tag. The H tag is a heading tag. Not a header, but a heading. And so, or headline rather, you can think of it that way too. So H1 is the biggest headline you can get. And you got H2, which is smaller. And if we go to the browser, you can see that heading main menu page. And so let's say I go here and I want to change what the heading is. Notice how the tag is lit up in blue, and attributes within the tag have their own color scheme. And the closing tag is also lit up in blue, but the text is in white. And so I am going to say the cure to cabin fever. So let's say I make that change and I do a file save, and then I go over here and I refresh the page, and there I got a different heading. Okay, and so that might be the beginning of this. Now, if you go further down here, text for the main page, text, 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 and so from there, we go back to Dreamweaver, you will see basically you have text going on for as far as the eye can see. And so what I'm going to do is I am going to grab that text. I'm just going to highlight all of it. Take it all the way down to wherever it ends. And I'm just going to type in, this is what I really had to say. And if I save that, and I go back here, this is what I really had to say. And so you can say a lot more. You can make that say anything, and it will continue to update that. Now, I've given you a table structure. You don't have to use it, but the table structure allows you to have text over here and this big image over here, and you can replace that image with anything you want, and that's where we're going to leave it today. I'm going to show you how to do that, because chances are that image has nothing to do with your website. In fact, I chose the most gaudy image I could because I seriously doubt that this image could be of any use to anyone. Okay, so let's say we had a different image in mind. So let's say I go back to Dreamweaver. So go back to the code. Somewhere in there we have a paragraph mark, but we have this tag called IMG. An IMG tag does not close. It's only open. So it's all self-contained. All it is a code that tells the browser to put an image here. So it has the src attribute, which says search for or source of, and then it's just got the name of the file. So if the image you want is with the code you're using, that's all you got to do. And so in this case, it is. So if I go over here for a second, and I've added a picture to this. So do is up here, and so we got this one, and I'm going to change that to make it even a little easier, because you can rename files all the time as long as you know that you're doing it. And I'm going to just call it sanlee.jpg. Now, one thing is important. The Lee, the L in Lee is capital. If I don't capitalize that, it will not work. Same thing with this. Now, you can use your files all lowercase letters or whatever you want to do, but you've got to be consistent. So all I'm going to do is go up here, and I'm going to change this to sanlee.jpg. And this is an Easter picture. And so if I do a file save, and I go over here, and I refresh the screen, ooh, now that was kind of surprising. Let me tell you why that happened. Now, yes, it's a nice picture, but maybe it could be a little smaller. The reason is because the browser actually controls how big the picture is displayed. But there's an attribute missing there because I deliberately left it off. So right after the source attribute, I'm going to give it a restriction. I'm going to say height. Height equals. Attributes always have equal sign. And I'm going to say 1000 for 1000 pixels. Let's see if that helps. I'll save. And then I go back here again and refresh the page. And that's better. And so right now it's even still a little too big. I want to make it smaller. So I go to, let's say I go over here and chop that down to say 500. 500. Now as I'm doing this, let me warn you about something. The browser or the server will still have to download that entire file, even at a larger size, in order to use it. And so, if you're going to change the size of your image, it's a lot better if you just change the size of your image ahead of time. And so that way the browser won't have to download a big picture and then display it smaller. And so that's basically a good idea. Okay, one last thing I'll say here is that if you go to these links, they should work. So for example, this is page 2, this is page 3, which you see there, then response form, and we'll go back to menu, and menu is where we left it. And so that's basically what I want you to understand in this sitting, is basically what the code does and how you can make it work. And we'll go into some more detail on some of the other things you can do shortly.